Howdy everybody. This is Nathan Donnelly on my channel Northwest Resilience, and I wanted to do a recap video of episode 4 of Alone Season 6, of which I was a participant of. I have been doing recap videos on all of the episodes previous to this, and I will do all of them after this as well. And I am trying to do as good a job I can of covering some of what I think is important that didn't make it in the edit for one reason or another. Both as a person who was on the show and has kind of some insight that somebody who only gets to see the show from the editor's perspective might have, and also from somebody who worked very hard for several years to get on the show. I applied for Alone while season 2 was still airing, and I got on during season 6. So there's a long period of time in there where I was really analyzing every little aspect of what it takes to not just be a survivalist, which is a skill I have been practicing and teaching for decades now, but to do it under the really kind of unique context of being on a television show with certain parameters to it that don't apply to every survival situation, but make for a really interesting and authentic TV show. So I have kind of an interesting, to me at least, my point of view on the Alone show, and I want to share it with people. I know a lot of people found it really interesting and adds to their experience of seeing other episodes. Real quick though, I'm gonna adjust my camera angle and make sure that it's pointed high enough for everybody. Okay. So I am out at a little teaching camp. I'm just getting started behind my place. This is a in-process survival demonstration shelter that a bunch of middle and high school kids have been helping me build, and it's just kind of a place where I feel like doing camera work, just like on Alone, next to a campfire, out in a shelter or something. So season 4 is where I'm picking up, and did I lose my spot on my notes? I already did. Let's see here. I've been watching every episode and trying to take notes of what catches my eye. Let's see, episode 4. What catches my eye, looking through it through that particular perspective of somebody who's going to be on the show, wants to be on the show, and do a good job there. Episode 4, day 14, opens up with Michelle talking about her grandfather. Michelle, at the end of season 3, had a pretty heavy-duty fire inside of her shelter. When you have a campfire inside of your home, it's giving off smoke all the time, obviously. Smoke is a little bit like fog in that it can condense on surfaces in the form of creosote and blacken things. That's how it flavors smoked salmon or jerky or any of the smoked cheese even. That stuff that's that's flavoring those foods is literally creosote. The stuff that can also cause a house fire, a chimney fire in particular, is creosote as well. It's a flammable material, and it condenses on colder surfaces, just like fog will on a glass window. When you have a fire inside of your structure, over the course of some weeks, you get a buildup of creosote on all kinds of stuff. And Michelle had done a really good job of building a back wall around her shelter, and then chinking for obvious purposes with moss all of the gaps between the logs she used on the section closest to her fire. Over time, being near a fire and with the dry air up there, all that moss dried out considerably, and then it got a coating of creosote on top of it that makes it really flammable. all the logs got the same coating, and all of a sudden she had logs with tinder stuffed into them, and the logs dried out as well. So what seems like a safe distance, what seems like, okay situation, ends up being a little tinderbox, and you might not even realize it, because how many times you get an opportunity to be in an outdoor shelter with a fire going on it for weeks on end to even witness that to occur. So she had a pretty significant fire inside of her shelter in the middle of the night, and ended up busting ass and putting it out. And then going back to sleep and waking up the morning of day 14, reminiscing about what her grandfather had taught her about just keep swinging. If there's something in front of you who's getting in your way, you don't stop swinging. You just keep going until there ain't nothing left in front of you. That's kind of a mentality that comes into play in life often, and on the Alone Show often. There's these periods where you have to really endure and be calm and not use a lot of psychological energy, and then there's these other times where, oh shit, it's go time, we gotta act, we gotta do things now. There's the Wolverine tracks, there's the fire, there's the this, there's the that. Now is the time to act, and you really have to know how to bounce between those two things. Goes to Jordan, and he hears a moose in the night. He's laying in his shelter, wakes up the next morning, and pretty sure he hears activity of a large animal, and goes out scouting the next morning. He's on this, not exactly an island because it's connected with this kind of muddy isthmus to the mainland there, but he's on an area that leaves really good tracks. It's the clay along the banks of this lake that we're all on, and he kind of remarks an experience that I had many times while I was out there. If I heard a sound outside, after a while you kind of realize which sounds are what kind of animals, like what sound a rabbit makes or a fox makes, kind of the cadence of their steps in the crunchy snow and all that. He's pretty sure he hears a large animal, and that you want to just unzip your sleeping bag, string up your bow, and go take off after what is out there. By the time that happened, putting your boots on, getting your layers, 5 minutes, the 5 loudest minutes of your day have passed, because you've got this loud, scratchy nylon, the zipper sound. Any animal that's out there that's going to hear that is half a mile away by the time you're done. I know it because I did it a whole bunch of times and never did lay my eyes on an animal that I definitely heard many times. After however many times getting out of your shelter at the middle of the night, realizing it's just a completely hopeless cause, you just kind of let it pass, and you start thinking a little bit, okay, how could I trap that animal? How could I find this animal in the night when I'm not all bundled up or whatever? And he kind of has that realization. When you're in your sleeping bag, it's totally helpless. You're not a hunter at that point. You cannot sneak up on an animal with a bow. If you're doing a traditional bow like we were, you have to be in close range of an animal, and if with any hope to shoot it at all. But he does go out the next morning, and he sees a whole nice bunch of moose tracks in clay. What really stuck in my mind there was the in clay part. He had an abundance of that material, it seems like, in that area that joined him to the mainland, and that was something that I only found maybe 2 little pockets of brick hard, frozen hard, and I only came across them after it was way too cold to do anything about it. I'm not sure what I would have done with clay in my particular situation, but it is a really useful material. You can make all kinds of stuff with it, particularly with shelters. He then comes up with this brilliant plan of making a tripwire to alert him of if an animal comes through, it's going to trip on his paracord string tied with cans on it and wake him up. It's a brilliant move, super brilliant move. Nikki jumps to Nikki next. She's deciding to do the age-old tradition of trapping rodents with deadfalls on Alone, and creates a Paiute deadfall trap, and actually sets up at least 2 of them that I'm aware of, maybe a whole bunch of them. And she ends up flattening a little vole, which is probably about twice the volume of a mouse. They were out there all over the place. They weren't really in abundance at my place, but they were probably the most common rodent that I can think of on my site. She cooks it with the hair on, which is something that in previous seasons of Alone, you see people gutting the mouse or rodent or whatever they have, and then they skin it as well. And one thing that people don't know about, it's kind of like the difference between eating chicken with the skin on or chicken with the skin off. Chicken has got a ton of fat in its skin, and that's pretty much true of mammals as well. A mouse is a little bitty couple of bites full of food, and I'd be willing to bet that a fair margin of the fat that's in that animal is in the skin that you would take off. I had been on an expedition in the Amazon years ago and hanging out with some indigenous people in the jungle in Ecuador, and they actually cooked a possum, a fairly large animal, almost the size of a raccoon down there, with the skin and the hair on. They burned the hair off above flames in a fire just a little smaller than this, and they cooked the whole animal just like that. They gutted it and didn't do anything else to it, and it was a lot simpler. In a survival situation, eating that skin just like on a chicken is going to provide a lot more calories, and it was, it's a lot easier to do to just burn the hair off. So I saw that she did that, and I thought that was an intelligent thing to do. If you're ever in a survival situation and small animals is what you have to eat, you might consider doing that, burning the hair off. Even if you're going to boil it, burn the hair off and then put it in with the skin later. You're going to get a lot more calories out of that. Then she eats it with a bunch of blueberries and goes out the next day and goes squirrel hunting. She decides that rodents isn't going to cut it, and takes her bow and totally plugs a squirrel. Like a brilliant shot, as good as Barry's shot on episode 1. Taking an arrow, shooting a squirrel out of a tree, and totally tags it from what looked like at least 15 or 20 yards. Really excellent bit of marksmanship there with her bow. She pretty stoked about that and is walking back to her camp with her kill, and ends up stabbing herself right in the back of her left leg, right in the back of the calf with her broadhead from her bow. And I got a little bit of the backstory from that, maybe on Facebook or maybe from her directly, I can't remember. But she had already at that point, we were weeks in, probably 3 weeks in at that point, had already lost a fair amount of weight, and she did not go in carrying a whole lot of weight to begin with. So her pants were constantly wanting to fall off, something I can relate to because mine were doing the same thing. So she has her bow in her left hand with an arrow in it, one in the chamber, and while she's walking, kind of hikes her pants up once. Well, her, the step back that she takes while she's walking forward, her back leg comes back into contact with the arrow and stabs herself. And I was like, I can absolutely 100% see me doing exactly the same thing while I'm out on hunt. I can absolutely see me doing that. So she is unfortunately plagued by a number of accidents that luckily none of them, are what's taken her out of the game. But man, that would be really, these little wounds, they just stuff did not heal out there. We both had, Nikki and I both had a split right here off the edge of our thumb that started I think my split started within first several days of me being out there. I think actually maybe after I cleaned my first fish on day 3. You clean an animal, you want to wash your hands off, you want to get everything off your hands. Well, that removes all the oils off your skin, and that dry, cold climate, your skin starts to crack. And I was not able to get rid of that crack in my thumb for over a month. That's how long it takes for anything to heal up there. And that only happened after I wrapped it up in athletic tape and was really conscious about always keeping it covered and not have pressure opening it up. So, yeah, she nicked her hand. Yeah, she nicked the back of her leg. A little bit more significant than a nick. That stuff doesn't just go away the way it does when you're at home and you're getting full meals and the temperature's there and you can bathe and do hygiene, all that real easily, and have unlimited first aid supplies. It takes a lot longer for things to heal when your body's under those stresses. And she rolled with it. I imagine there was probably a bit more to the first aid. I don't think they did any of the first aid on her leg beyond her initial thing, but that's something she almost certainly dealt with for probably weeks. I know Callie during season 3 when she got the spider bites on her side from the Patagonian recluse. She got several bites, and they kind of covered it like, it was something that came and went for, after maybe a week or a couple of weeks. She dealt with that for well over a month, where she was having to constantly treat these pretty serious poisonous spider bites while she's in the wilderness, and doing it with herbal medicine she's making herself. It's totally freaking impressive. So any little thing out there, man, it takes a lot to get over. Then, she's already experienced her first accident from when she nicked her hand. It wasn't that big of a deal for her. She's super nonchalant after she gets over the shock of like, God, it's stupid, I just stabbed myself in the leg, da da da. She goes to her shelter, she really nonchalantly builds a fire, deals with it, it's not a big deal anymore, and she's through it. That was really impressive to me. This fire is really enthusiastic right now, so I'm going to just kind of do some things to it. Yeah, she handles it like it's no big deal at all. And maybe in the front country it wouldn't have been a big deal, but where we were, it was a pretty serious deal. Just to have blood get all over your stuff. We're supposed to be having everything so bears aren't scenting it and all that, which is impossible, by the way. But she's got to clean all that stuff off. Like just cleaning a garment out there is such a difficult task. So I was really, really impressed with just her nonchalant mindset of dealing with that whole thing and getting through it. Because a lot of other people would have taken that as another excuse to potentially go home, and she didn't. So Ray, back at his camp, he's still out taking another shot at another squirrel. He's still a hunter. He had his session over losing that one squirrel that was his companion and having to eat it, but he's still out there back at it, and it's really beginning to realize that his camp was pretty devoid of any game. He probably had to walk a while to find that one squirrel that he did find. My camp, exactly the same thing. I did not have really any sign of game for quite a while. Once the snow fell, I could find a little bit more of it because they were leaving their tracks through the night, but it was such a a game-free area at that point. So he decides he's gonna focus on something a little more positive, which is his freaking kick-ass shelter. He already had a really sweet shelter going, and then he decided to chink the whole thing over in moss. And I don't know how he did it in a day. I don't know if it actually was done in a day or if that was the editing thing, but he made that thing look freaking awesome. He might have had the best shelter on the show, honestly. And he had a resource again that I didn't really have. This sphagnum moss up there in the Arctic in the right conditions will grow like a 6-inch, 8-inch thick carpet over everything. And for whatever reason, my site liked to grow reindeer lichen instead, and that doesn't form the same carpet that the moss does. Hey, cutie. Hey, what you doing? Where you been? Come on over here. Come here. Come on over here. This is Abby, my pup. She's been out running around after rabbits or something. I haven't seen her all day. Yeah. Bang up job, man, for after like being in for I don't know, over 2 weeks at that point. Still having the energy to put together another massive shelter with a ton of material into it. That was really impressive. And then he talks about, he's kind of realizing the freedom that he has out there. It's another talk about freedom. There's been one in every single episode, somewhere from someone realizing what it means to be in a position where you make the calls for your own life. As a rule, you're the only one doing them. You're responsible for that. It's a lot of responsibility, but it's all on you. And if you don't do it, the only one who misses out is you. And there's a real amazing freedom to that Ray, I think, he expounds on later on in the episode. Jordan shoots back to Jordan. Jordan makes a really cool moose call out of birch bark and ends up making basically a megaphone and realizes the wind is perfect for calling moose, where his scent is not going to be blown down into the area where he's going to be potentially bringing moose in. So they're not going to smell him, basically. So he starts doing calling. It sounds like he called periodically on and off for hours to bring moose into his area. Then he ends up hearing some disturbance from the ravens in the area, and makes the comment that, like, hey, whenever the ravens kind of pick up, it means usually something's going on in the environment. A large animal might come in to the scene, and that perks his ears up. That's a very astute observation that a lot of people refer to as bird language. Birds are kind of the sentinels of any given environment. They are really they're prey animals, so they're always paying attention to what might potentially want to eat them, which is just about everything. But they are also very vocal, and they're from a high perch, so when they know when they're in a safe place, they can be as vocal as they want, and everything else pays attention to that. To the deer, the chipmunks, all the game is paying attention to what the birds are doing. So if you're a smart hunter, you're paying attention to that as well, because you can read from what the birds are doing and saying if something in the environment is changing. And if you're really good at it, you can tell what in the environment is changing as well. Jordan perks his ears up, realizes he hears a moose, and sees a moose, and then grabs his bow. He's still in his socks. He's like kind of trying to quietly move across the terrain, get a shot on this moose. And it's along that long clay on the far side of that long clay flat that he's camped near, and takes what looks to be a super long shot with his bow. I think he had a 60-pound bow, so it definitely had the juice to fling an arrow that far for big game. But I don't know if you've ever shot across kind of flat expanses like he was. There's not a whole lot for your eye as an instinctual shooter to gauge distance on, and he ends up putting the arrow right between the legs of the moose. Totally misses the shot, scares the moose off. I'm pretty convinced he's never going to see the moose again until he watches it on TV a year later, which is probably exactly what happened. But he's pretty bummed about that. That was a hell of an opportunity to be within range, even a far range of a moose, and then to blow it. That's a thing that you don't want to have to go through. Wonia comes in, and she starts joking about wanting to be out there for 94 days, which would be a new record by an entire week for the Alone Show, for anybody to go 94 days. And joking about she would make a t-shirt that says Eisler thrived for 94 days, and all I got was a stupid t-shirt. I thought that was pretty funny. Sense of humor, super important. When stuff goes sideways, you need to keep your sense of humor and a calm frame of mind. She's not had any game in 2 weeks. She's out there eating crowberries, which were really abundant all over, everywhere I was on my site and at orientation camp. There was crowberries carpeting everything. Crowberries are really delicious. I kind of thought they were reminiscent of watermelon, both in